Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders for coders about all aspects of creating your best life as a developer.
I'm Will, the accomplished developer and aspiring software architect.
And I'm Beej, the journeyman developer, sharing my journey in development.
Complete Developer Podcast is supported by listeners like you. We are now on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Complete Developer Podcast.
When most of us finish a project, we don't really think much about it unless a problem comes up. However, once you've rolled an application out to production, there are certain things that you can expect at various points in time as the application ages. Like any other aging process, this will eventually result in system death. Now, that said, you can often expect certain things to happen as your application ages and extend the useful life of the application. In this episode, we're going to discuss some of the things that can crop up when an application is in production and how to extend the lifetime of an application. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
Man, I have been in SQL purgatory. For part of the system I'm working on, I have a little north of 100 stored procedures that I'm responsible for.
It seems like you're always in SQL purgatory.
I have been here for a while. Like I'm getting I'm getting a little tired of SQL. Just because there's stuff that is harder to do in it. Having a constant would be nice that I could share across stored procedures, that kind of stuff. I've just been cleaning up stored procs, locking some stuff down. We have security checks that happen at the database level as well. And that is literally all I've been doing. Except, I think yesterday there was one bug in some .NET code that I fixed in like 3 seconds and pushed out a NuGet package for. But other than that, it's basically been all week in SQL. So that's all I'm fighting. How about you?
It's been a busy week for me. My main project at work went into full production. The side project that I've been working on is now in testing, and we're finding all sorts of fun stuff, mostly dealing with latency in uploading files across the network. It's annoying, but I'm making progress on it. You actually told me something today that I'm looking into, and I may integrate tomorrow and see if that works. I've been working on my talk for Codeland. I know we talked about that last week. I'll be speaking on my journey from med school to becoming a developer. In the talk, I plan on getting real about my struggle with depression and overcoming it. It's going to be a good inspirational talk, but it's going to have some dark parts to it too. So it's been interesting drudging this stuff up. So speaking of drudging things up, we've got our final week for Book OTs. I don't know. I don't like that name.
No, it sounds weird.
We'll see. We'll work on something. But we've got our final week for the IoT's book. This is the last week we're talking about the pragmatic programmer. The last 2 chapters of the book talk about the projects that you are on as a pragmatic programmer. Chapter 7, the penultimate chapter, focuses on the time before a project starts. This includes gathering requirements, understanding the constraints of what you're developing, and knowing when to start, kind of avoiding analysis paralysis that keeps you from going, or avoiding jumping in too quickly. And then the final chapter deals with the projects themselves. It looks at the larger picture of working with a team, establishing working rules, and automation and some project-wide testing. Now, remember, these chapters and sections don't have to be read sequentially. If you're dealing with an issue on a project team, you can jump directly to chapter 8 and read about it. Now, next week, I'll announce our next book and give you guys an introduction to it. Who's talking to us this week?
So we got a comment from Geek Interface on the top 5 LinkedIn mistakes with a write-up for Tricks of the Trade, saying failure is one of the greatest teachers in life, and that is why all of your unit tests should fail before they pass.
Thanks. That is a great summary of what Will had to say in Tricks of the Trade. I didn't want to pester him late in the evening when I was putting together the show notes, so I made that offer on the website to the first person who gave us a write-up of the Tricks of the Trade. You totally earned your water bottle. Send us an email with your contact information because we've got one just for you. Guys, if you'd like your very own Complete Developer water bottle, leave us a review in iTunes or comment on the website or any of our social media. We post all of our episodes to Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We're also on Instagram and Tumblr. Also, check us out each week on Facebook and YouTube Live, where we talk about what's going on in the tech world and answer some listener questions. Now, I do want to point out there will not be a live next week because it's 4th of July here in the United States, and there's going to be a lot of loud noises as fireworks explode outside the houses. You can join the conversation anytime via Slack by going to slack.completedevelopernetwork.com.
Applications have a life cycle. Whether the app runs unmodified for a few days before being replaced by a newer version or runs for 20 years, there are few applications that can run unattended forever. The progress of culture, the internet, moving pieces of hardware, changes in platforms, programming languages, and programming approaches all conspire to shorten the useful lifespan of a piece of software from the very moment that it is released. You're almost certain to have to make changes to software at various points during its lifespan and in response to events that occur, no matter what you do. However, if you have some awareness of the kinds of things that can happen to software as it lives out in the wild, you may be able to make some of these changes easier to bear.
We're going to discuss some of the things that happen to running software in the wild over time. While we're breaking down this episode into blocks of time, when you can expect certain issues to occur, these classifications are kind of arbitrary. Basically, if something is in the 10-year block, that doesn't mean that you won't see it happen for another 10 years. It means that it's most likely to happen by the 10-year mark. It might happen in the first week, or it might happen 20 years later. These are rough groupings kind of based on Will's experience being in the industry for as long as he has. So the first grouping we're going to talk about is 6 months to a year.
Yeah. And so the first and most obvious thing that sounds like a joke because it kind of is, but it's real, is you will get a new front end JavaScript framework, hitting the scene. This is in the 6 month to 1 year range because these evolve pretty quickly and they often include breaking changes. Now, assuming that you're using a long-term support version of your JS framework, the next one you care about will probably release within a year.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I remember when we went from Angular 1.5 to 2. I mean, there was other Angular 1s that kind of helped with that transition, but we were doing Angular 1.5 when 2 came out. And 2 was it was a whole different way of programming Angular.
So yeah, if your app is out there running, are you going to have to go out there and update this thing? Is that a realistic thing that you're looking forward to? This is something you should be thinking about when you're rolling it and going, okay, when this comes.
Yeah, I recall you and I were consulting some on the side, and we had a business person, as a small startup, and he had heard about Angular 2 and was excited about it and wanted to bring it in. But when we got there, we saw how much they had built and how well it was built already with
Meteor.
I think
was it Meteor JS?
No, it was Angular. It was Angular 1.5.
Okay, so that's a different one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're thinking different. No,
everybody likes Angular.
Yeah. No, he had heard about the new stuff in Angular 2, and he was like, we want to update. And we came in, and I remember having a consultation where I'm like, all right, look, here's your options because of the breaking changes going into Angular 2. To get these one or two little features that you want, you're going to have to either rewrite your entire front-end code base or wrap all of your Angular 1 stuff to work in Angular 2. Whereas if you just want these one or two features, we could build something for that.
I remember that conversation now. It's weird because, we've had so many of those conversations, but the iteration pattern on JavaScript frameworks is just insane, and it's not going to slow down. And speaking of things that are insane, the other thing you can expect within 6 months to a year is a 0-day or major short notice vulnerability in something in your stack.
There are always major vulnerabilities out there in the wild. Some of them you're going to have to handle rather quickly.
Yeah, some of the HTTPS stuff that's happened, like all the Heartbleed stuff and all that, people had to get on it. And you need to be prepared if you've got an app in the wild that is going to happen to you in that kind of time frame.
Now, this does vary a lot based on your technology stack. If you're using Delphi, you may not have as many 0-day vulnerabilities because it's pretty stable. It's been around for a long time. Your JavaScript framework, however, a little bit different. The thing, too, that's going to vary is how you mitigate these. So the strategy that you take to deal with these vulnerabilities will change based on the technology that you're using.
So another thing that will come up within 6 to 12 months is new reporting and analytics requirements. You have an app in production. People want numbers out of it. Somebody paid for that thing to be out there. It serves a business purpose. Those people never know what they want until the system is out there for a while, and then they decide on what they want. Expect to have to deliver it 6 to 12 months out.
Yeah.
Like, if you ever seen that not happen?
No, I'm just thinking about the most recent times that it's happened. To mitigate this as much as possible, we have implemented a very strenuous user acceptance testing where they, because I'm building stuff for internal users, they are required to come in and do so much testing and to do as much as they can. So probably for the past 3 to 4 months, we've been dealing with this and data migration issues, which are a whole nother topic. But they would get in there and they'd be like, "Oh, hey, we didn't even think about this, but we need this report run, and we can't do it with what we've got." Now, thankfully, most of it was, the information that you're providing, we could do this if we had one more column in the CSV that comes out. I'm like, all right, that's doable. But you get out into production, and 6 months down the line, you got to add that. That's a pain.
Yeah, and it'll happen. It'll be somebody with a lot of influence that wants it too. The way I was taught was, somebody actually said to me, they said, just pretend that you are taking a kid to Baskin Robbins, and they get their ice cream and they go sit down. And what happens within like 5 minutes? Oh, I wanted the cotton candy ice cream, right? Understand that when that kid grows up, they put on a suit and they ask you for new analytics. Like, I actually had a senior developer tell me that, and man, that stuck with me because
I totally believe it. The thing that I was thinking is, what happens here is you get you work with the business people, you get the app out in production, and then it's about 5 or 6 months later that a semi-annual or quarterly report needs to be run on the new app. And that's when the higher up people go, wait, we can't get all the data that we want in this report.
Yeah, or I need to justify this, $250,000 I spent on this thing last year because I'm going to get fired if I don't. And I forgot about it because I was playing golf. And, that's a legit thing.
Now, another thing that happens around this time is implementation detail rot.
Yeah. So developers, our memory is basically garbage. I'll routinely tell people at work, they'll ask me questions about stuff and I'm like, I've slept since then. I'll go look it up for you. I don't know. And within 6 months, this is serious enough that you can't remember major things about the app in a lot of cases.
Oh, dude, I totally get you there because I've been working on the same app for almost 2 years. And since we've been in this UAT phase, right, we were in production now, but we were doing this UAT stuff. The UI developer would go, well, this is what it's returning. I was like, that's what it's supposed to return when it errors. Well, why? I'm like, that's the agreement we had with the original UI developer on this application. Like,
and by the way, that developer's gone now.
Yeah. It's like, why did you do that? Dude, that was 2 years ago. I have no idea. Or it's something that's been running just fine. Like something we built very early on and it's been running just fine. And now they want to add something to it. It's like, you got to give me, like, we'll be in a meeting and like, hey, how difficult would it be to make this change? I'm like, give me about 5 minutes to go look it up and tell you, because I don't remember. It's been a year and a half since I touched that. And yeah, man, it's totally, and like we're even working on the same application. There are pieces of it that I haven't touched in a year or so.
Yeah. And I've worked with project managers who will be, they'll say, I can't believe you don't remember that. I mean, why don't you remember that? And it's like, okay, you were a school teacher before. Do you remember what happened on August 29th of 2016 in your algebra class? If you don't, then you got to back off.
Yeah.
Because that's about what it is for us.
No, I'm very lucky. The business analyst I work with she completely understands. And when I say, hey, I've got to go look this up, she's like, all right, just let me know as soon as you can so I can tell them. I work with a great team though. I really do. Yeah,
of course, this whole process is completely normal, right? Like this is why you want clean code. This is why you want docs within reason on both of those, because some people take those things overboard and they don't ever release. But, it's a thing that will happen. Now, another thing that will jump up and bite you within the 6 to 12 month time frame that doesn't sound like it will is browser technology changes.
Oh, yeah. Browsers evolve rapidly. Because they are such a huge security target, they often implement changes in such a short period of time that it can break your applications.
Yeah. I mean, just find yourself a Flash developer or Silverlight developer or somebody that did Visual Basic 6 ActiveX documents like I did. They call them web classes or Java applets. And ask them about this, because the browser makers decided that, hey, this is insecure. You're not doing it anymore. It doesn't matter that your business is focused around it. It will not be a thing.
On the other end, they add stuff to browsers. I was talking to our other advanced API developer yesterday, and one of the UI developers and I were explaining Blazor to him and how it's actually running C# in the browser.
Yeah, it's compiling it down.
Yeah, as opposed to it's opposed to Razor, which transpiles it down to JavaScript. This is running it.
Yeah,
there, and it just blew his mind. He's like, all the browsers can do this.
Yeah,
yeah. He's like, even Mozilla. We're like, yes, even Mozilla.
Yeah, Mozilla is not the bad one. Well, I guess it is now that IE is kind of going, well, I don't know, Opera or Safari. Safari's got some quirks to it too. But yeah, there's all that kind of stuff. And there's also the fact that users' expectations change a lot. So your app will start looking dated. You'll have stuff where it's like, it's doing a post back instead of just getting a WebSocket response to say, hey, this thing's finished on the back end.
Yeah.
Little stuff like that. Users change how they perceive your app. Or the new dark theme stuff that's coming into browsers now, where it'll detect your. So what?
I love the dark theme.
Yeah, I do too, and I love that that's finally getting there. It's 2019.
I agree with you.
I've had a hack plugin on every browser that I've used for 10 years, probably, to make a dark theme a thing.
Oh, it's just, and it's going to be so great when like websites are built to have dark theme.
Yeah, where it's understood that like your branding does not override my ability to not have my screen hurt my eyes.
Right.
So that changes.
So the next time frame we're going to talk about is the 2 to 5 year mark. During this time, you may get a new backend framework. The backend framework of your application will probably need to be changed within about 5 years, just straight up due to deprecation.
Yeah, so it'll have vulnerabilities and stuff in there that they didn't know about when it was released, and when you built your stuff, it is known about now, and they're like, yeah, we're not fixing that. Microsoft, they did recently release a Windows XP patch for some kind of issue. I forget what it was, but it has to be extremely severe for them to do that.
Well, they had said they weren't going to support it anymore, and I think it was the federal government that was like, no, we still use this. We need you to support this. And I don't know, but there were probably some deals worked out with them for.
Oh, yeah. But XP is still out there in a lot of embedded systems and a lot of like small, like weird corners. It's still out there. And so they had to patch it. After about a 5-year window, you can expect, being a typical plebe developer that's not building, something that gets Microsoft's attention when it has a bug, that your framework is going to have to be updated. Like .NET 2 isn't being, in wide use anymore.
Now, these tend to be a lot slower than your front-end changes because they typically run in environments that are more resistant to change, more secure, and
have crankier developers.
Yeah. And basically, with this, there's just not as much new flashy in this area, though. In the .NET world, we've got some really cool new flashy going on with .NET Core.
Yeah, but the thing is nobody sees it, so users aren't pushing on it as much either, which helps.
That is an interesting point. We really should do an episode about this. But I was talking, our front-end developer that I work with, he built this really neat load screen that we're actually going to start using on all of our applications. That may it's really, really neat what he did. It's got the Tennessee logo and the stars spin around and then come into the center. It's so cool and so flashy and so neat. He showed it to me. I'm like, dude, that is so awesome. Everyone's going to love that. They're going to think it's great. And we got to talking to him like, when I do something that's really awesome and really amazing, nobody knows about it because it's behind the scenes and it's just, oh, hey, it works like he said it was going to work. They don't know all the craziness that went into building it or all the really cool stuff behind it. They just know, oh, it's supposed to do the thing. It does the thing. Cool.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of nice because then you don't have to talk to people for too long. They're not driving change into your environment. So
that's true.
It can be kind of nice. So speaking of changes getting driven, another thing you can expect is that your web server will get up to date. Will get updated. This can be anything, like Apache getting patches. I guess if Apache gets enough patches, is it Apache server? I'm so sorry for the dad joke there. But the web server that you're running on is going to change probably in the next 5 years to some degree. Either you're going to get security patches or there's going to be different best practices. They're going to say, hey, you need to do it this way because of this security thing. Those kind of things will be in the mix. And you're going to have to test and make sure your stuff isn't broken when this happens.
Web server developers tend to try and make changes transparent. They really do. But this can often mean having to make configuration changes at the very least. And configuration can be really, really annoying when you get it wrong.
Yeah. Or when you
don't
test
know what's going on. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the worst, right? Is you test it in your QA environment and you only have a single server. And then you go out to a server farm in production after you've tested it and none of the things work.
Oh, totally fair. Just like this file transfer application I've been working on the side. It works great on my local machine at work. I can move a file into the folder. Doesn't matter what size it is, whatever. A huge PDF. Just moves it right on in, uploads it to our long-term storage. No problem. Then we go put it out on the server. And the latency issue was just like it wasn't. There was no latency issue moving from one folder to another on my machine. Something I never even thought about until we actually got it out there.
Yeah, and you'll run into that with web servers too, right? Like where it's it's doing checks or you've got some kind of server handler stuff going on in the mix, and all of a sudden stuff will break that made an assumption about timings. Down in the guts of your app, especially older apps.
Yeah,
are real bad about that.
Next, your operating system version will be deprecated. The OS version that your app was built to run on or tested on is going to eventually deprecate. Usually this happens within 5 years. And I have to say this. This is one thing that Microsoft is fairly decent about. I know we trash talk Microsoft a lot because we're Microsoft developers, but this is one of the things that they're fairly decent about is a lot of their operating systems maintain backward compatibility.
Yeah, they do. But even then, at a low level, you'll still get bit by it.
I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm just saying that this is one thing that they have done a decent job of trying to mitigate, in my opinion.
But I mean, I can remember, back in the day, switching from, I want to say it was Windows 98 or NT to Windows 2000. around that time frame, there's a string that comes back when you ask for the operating system version. And a lot of people, did their code differently depending on the OS. They branched based on that, and it would return something different that wasn't expected. And so a lot of people got bitten because they didn't have a default, option. And in fact, that's why there was no Windows 9, supposedly, is because instead of, people were looking for Windows space 9 in there, for Windows 95 and Windows 98 to tell them which calls to use. And they knew that was out there. And so they didn't do it, supposedly to avoid breaking this. So this has been a problem that goes all the way back. By the way,
there's an example of Microsoft doing a good job at something. I just feel like we always trash talk them. And so I wanted to speak to some of their positives when we had an opportunity to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got to do rare and unique things when you get a chance. So I totally in favor of that. I mean, that's like traveling to a foreign country. If you get a chance, you go do it. So another thing that, is in the mix with that is that if you were not on the bleeding edge when you were developing, which you probably weren't. So like, let's say that you're developing now and it's 2019, you might be developing on Windows Server 2016, for instance. And, there's always new stuff coming out. I can't remember when their next OS comes out or if it's out already, but you probably aren't doing the very latest and very greatest because development environments tend to get behind. So you're closer to that OS dying off than you would be otherwise, just by default.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense.
Another thing that will come up within, 2 to 5 year time frame is that your encryption and hashing methods that you're using to secure stuff start to get insecure. You're probably using it to try to make hacking more difficult. So you're storing stuff like, passwords, you're hashing them and, putting them in a table, or you're encrypting stuff when it goes over the wire. And by the way, this includes HTTPS, right? This includes a lot of stuff that's, kind of baked in. The method that you're using may be going away within 2 to 5 years because of technological change. So for instance, we used to hash stuff all the time with, hashing methods that were really not all that great, but they worked well enough. And then all of a sudden what happens? Well, they get enough memory that they can actually just test it out. They can do a rainbow table attack on a hash set, and they can go, okay, now I've got all the passwords because I can reverse engineer that. And newer tech will always be driving that. GPUs are driving that in a lot of respects.
Depending on your platform, this may be tricky to switch out, especially if you're storing the hashed or encrypted data.
Yeah, hashes are the worst. Because let's say that you log in, you got a password, and we hash that and we store it. We no longer have that password, right? So if we want to update to the new hashing method, we can't until the next time you log in. Because we don't have the data. Yeah, unless we hack it ourselves and we reverse engineer your password and then do it. But no. That's a little squirrely,
I was thinking that I wasn't going to go there, but yeah, I was totally down that.
There's always that one dude that's like, yeah, do it. Don't do it.
Yeah, like what you sent to me when I said I was almost done with the outline.
Yeah, do it.
Next, you're going to see hardware failures. These are very likely at this 2 to 5 year mark. Hardware failures happen over time. In the next 5 years, it's really likely that something's going to fail on whatever machine is running your code. I mean,
even if it's a VM.
Yeah, my machine is 2 years old, and we were talking about some major issues it's having with the newer Windows updates. Just today, where I'm like, dude, I don't know if we can record tonight because my machine is a brick at the moment. And it took my entire lunch break for us to get my laptop working.
And this is why we make fun of Microsoft. And so we're back, y'all. So you'll have hardware failures. It can be everything from a hard drive crash to a network card messing up to, hey, we're on this old version of VMware and we've got to move to a new box because we're out of space and we're past the lease point or whatever. A lot of times this means actually having to move your code to a different machine. And while you might think that, okay, it'll be okay, I can just move it, sometimes you get nasty little surprises then.
Next, you'll see updated legal frameworks. Laws are constantly changing, And the regulatory environment in which you designed your system may not be the same in 5 years. Just ask Europe.
Yeah. Or ask America with HIPAA or with CAN-SPAM or Sarbanes-Oxley, right? They'll, like, let's say you roll an app out. At the same time, Congress is debating a new bill that has, privacy implications. They'll give you, 18 months, 24 months even to comply. More if you're a big enough business that you own a few Congress people. Because we all know that's how it works too. Right? But within a 5-year period, that thing is hitting and your app has to take it into account. And you did not design it for that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, imagine working in the government.
Yeah.
Where, legislation changes and you are the government. So you got to make those changes immediately.
Right.
Well, there's usually a little bit of all right, you've got this amount of time to do it because it does take time to do things. They recognize that. They don't always recognize how much time it takes to do things, but, you hear that across the board.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, like with GDPR, here, I'm going to send you an email and delete all trace of me from your systems. Yeah, I know I bought stuff from you and I know that you take backups, but you still got to, you got to get rid of it. And like, what does compliance look like on that? It can get really scary really quick, especially when stuff isn't, litigated yet. Like GDPR hasn't really hit the courts at a level that lets people make good decisions. So people are changing software probably in ways that are not even appropriate.
And y'all, this isn't just in the software development industry.
No.
I saw this in medicine when I was there. So speaking of that, now we're going to talk about manual rot.
Yeah, and I made this term up. I love basically, here's what happens. You make small changes over the years, right? Usually in response to users wanting stuff or regulatory changes or, hey, the hard drive crashed. We had to move it to this other box and we had to do this really dumb API change because we had to get the system back up, right? That occurs. Your manual or whatever you have, whatever docs you have for that software probably did not get updated because it's never a priority when there's a scream fest going on in the server room.
Oh, that's what you mean by manual. I thought a completely different meaning of that word.
Okay.
Non-automated rot is what I was thinking.
Well, I didn't. It kind of is, right?
Yeah. But no. I follow you now. Yeah, totally. Documentation and instructions are a lot of times an afterthought, and you gotta update that. You know what? I have seen this in a lot of places, and I have mad respect for the people that do this because I didn't do it when I first started, and I've started doing it now that I have matured in my career as a developer. But one thing I really like is when people make changes. Like I have seen some senior developers do this where they'll go in and they'll be like, changed on this date by this person. Here's what I did.
Yeah, I'm getting better about that. The main thing is a lot of times when I do changes, it's like sweeping refactorings and like all that stuff is gone anyway.
Yeah.
But I do like to at least have it in source control.
Yeah.
Where I can look at it.
Yeah. And some of this stuff wasn't source controlled. And so, or the person that really stands out to me is someone that's been doing this. He was a software developer when you and I were in high school, maybe even junior high. Like he's close to retirement. The guy has an attitude that I hope I have when I've been doing it as long as he has. He gets excited. He was the one I was talking to about Blazor, and he was just so pumped and excited about it. I'm like, dude, you're going to be out of the industry in like 5 or 6 years anyways. He's like, I don't care. It's so awesome.
He might not. He might change his mind. Yeah, and back in the day, I definitely wrote a lot more comments and did a lot more stuff like that because our tool chains were so bad. But yeah, this is why you want to do that, especially for once you've gotten out production and you're making production level fixes. That's when those kind of comments really shine.
So next, we're going to talk about the 5 to 10 year range. And first off, you're going to see deprecated platform APIs. In this 5 to 10 year period, you can expect at least some of the APIs that you're relying on are going to go away.
Okay, so like let's say that I would want to say that let's say if you're interacting with Facebook, but they like to break the APIs anyway. But there's a lot of vendors, like let's say that you were interacting with QuickBooks, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have updated their API, I believe, in the last 5 years. And most of your other vendors will do that. There'll be other opportunities that'll come up, or they'll go, hey, this needs to be freshened up to be up to this other standard, or, whatever. And so you can't rely on those third-party APIs to still be around.
Right. And usually they will give you some notification that this is happening. I know we did an episode not that long ago about kind of that, and where we discussed, I remember the conversation about updating people and letting them know about changes to your API if you're a vendor. The thing is, this could be due to security, other APIs becoming available. There's a lot of different things that this could be because of.
Yeah. And 5 to 10 years out, the other thing that happens is that the developer that used to get the newsletter for the API provider works somewhere else.
Yeah.
I got a notification for a former employer. I mean, this was a company I worked for in 2013, I think last year, that one of the APIs that they were using was being deprecated, and, it's going away in 30 days. Like, this was the first thing I got. I got it on my Gmail account. And thankfully, I knew somebody over there, and I was like, hey, you need to know about this. And that was all the warning they got.
Yeah. Yeah. That happens. That happens. Next, you'll see deprecated compilers or tools.
Right. So let's say that you're running Visual Studio. Granted, Microsoft does a pretty good job on the backward compatibility, but they will still burn you. For instance, going to .NET Core, T4 templates, which I use, sparingly. Those were not available in .NET Core projects there for a while. You couldn't get them to work. And so if you're relying on that stuff, you may not be able to move forward. I've also seen things where, some of the tools, they changed the licensing model. For instance, third parties are especially bad about this, where they go, okay, yeah, this used to be free. It's not free now. And hey, you upgraded your IDE because, you're not working on this one project until something comes up. And then something comes up and you find out that, hey, I got to pay $500. That's a really ugly situation to find yourself in. You'll similarly find stuff with the compiler and other tools. So if your language of choice is changing a lot, the version of the compiler that you were using may be out of date. It may have security vulnerabilities or just be not optimal or whatever. And you're going to have to port code to work with the newer stuff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I keep a version of Visual Studio 2012 and 2015 because every now and then I do have to deal with much older code.
Yeah.
But most of my development is in 2017. Now, another thing you'll see is Dead C developers. As your software ages and maintenance is required, you'll also find that your development team tends to change quite a bit.
Yeah. So the people that love to write new apps are not there anymore. They may be in another department, or they may just be working on something else. They're not maintaining this app because that's not their jam. Mm-hmm. And as a result, you tend to get people that like to maintain old apps. And a lot of reasons, come into this. But one of the big ones is that they can't learn the new stuff for whatever reason, or they don't want to.
I've seen this. I know people. I have worked with them in the past. Both in development and outside of development, that just, and it's not just related to this. I mean, there are people that they don't want to learn the new stuff. They don't want to learn the new way of doing something. And so we need these people in the industry. I'm not going to say we don't, because we do need people to maintain that. I do not want to maintain old VB code.
Right. But there might come a day when you want to maintain old .NET Core code. When you're 55 and you're just like, hey, I want to coast until I can retire and I think I can do it now. Like that's a legit thing. And, hey, if they're keeping the system stable, I don't have an issue with that. But
fair enough.
We'll have a different kind of developer.
Yeah, it's a different mindset. It's a whole different way of thinking. And it can be frustrating when you have to work for or under someone who has that mindset. Like you may be brought on to be the new innovative person working under someone who is the old maintainer. and they don't understand why you need to do the things that you do or why you have to do things a certain way, because they didn't have to do that when they did stuff.
Yeah. Try explaining objects to somebody who's never needed them, or, dependency injection, or any of the other stuff that we talk about, or, table variables in SQL versus, hey, just use a cursor. Like, those people are out there and they're maintaining apps, but yeah, it really can be difficult to fix certain kinds of things when that's what your team is.
Yeah.
The next thing that happens is a change in your users. The first generation of your users, they were involved in the design, they were involved in the rollout at whatever level they were, and they have expectations about how the software works, and they report bugs. If you don't fix those bugs, the next generation of users grows up with them, and they come to expect some of those bugs to work the way that they work, even if it's technically incorrect. This could be anything from, hey, this field isn't editable, but it actually is, and they edit it and they use it for something, to any number of other things. I mean, you'll see people do really strange workflows sometimes because they just learned the app from somebody that didn't care that much, and they kind of made it up as they went, and they found something that worked. And once they have something that worked, they don't learn anything new.
Oh yeah, I've totally seen that.
It's Dead Sea users.
Yeah, pretty much.
This is exactly what it is.
I like that. That's a good term. Yeah, no, I've completely seen that. And what's really bad is when you're replacing a system, and they're like, well, the old system did that. Next, at this point, it's going to be slower for new features to come out than it will be for your competition that doesn't have as much technical debt as you do.
Yeah,
so
or as much data, for that matter.
Yeah, so if you have competition, then your old piece of software may be harder to change than their newer stuff.
Yeah, and this is why people like rewrites, is because, hey, I can get rid of this technical debt and go do the new thing. Competition gets more difficult over time because you have newcomers hitting the market that decide that, hey, this old way of doing stuff that made sense 10 years ago doesn't make sense now.
Yeah.
And so they don't implement it, but you have to maintain it because your users still want it.
Finally, you have knowledge rot. I mean, this is kind of like manual rot, but at another level, at a deeper level. You will cycle through developers over a 10-year period. It may be that none of the original developers are around.
Yeah, there's code that I was writing about 10 years ago. Yeah, I guess that project finished up about 10 years ago. A number of employers back, and I ran into the guy that maintained it last year at Music City Tech.
Wow.
And I asked him how it was running, and he said, hey, we haven't had to touch it. But I'm sitting here thinking, that poor dude, when he does have to, there's nobody at that company that remembers that. Like, they don't even know. Well, I think some of the people really high up know I was involved.
No, we have one person that's still around, that's been around for a while. I mean, the thing with working in the public sector, you do tend to have people that stick around for longer periods of time.
Yeah,
things do.
Or small family businesses are like that too.
Yeah, that's true. And so we do have one person that, like, whenever I'm on the maintenance team and I get something that is just ancient, I have to call her up or send her a Slack and be like, all right, hey, so where do I even go to work on this? There's so much knowledge. And then there's a couple other people, some of our DBAs. It's like, all right, we need a knowledge transfer. We need you to write this stuff down. They're working on that now.
And can you please organize the zip disks in this cabinet and find me a drive so I can actually pull this thing out when I need it? Literally, I was going through the supply cabinet at work a few weeks ago. I was looking for some pins, and I found a box of floppy disks. So you can imagine, if you're still finding those, you'll still find code that was written to run with those.
So the next time frame we're going to talk about is 10 to 20 years. And this is like some really old school stuff. Devs are getting hard to find, and they're going to be at a premium. In the 10 to 20 year range, the number of developers still in the industry, at least those who remember how to work on the code and the software like yours, is getting smaller and more limited.
Yeah, developers die, they retire, or worse, they move into non-coding management positions. This gets expensive, and you'll end up spending a huge chunk of budget just maintaining a system versus improving it if it makes it this long.
And that's the thing. You may have built something in a really stable technology. We've talked about this. There is some stuff out there that is still running in COBOL.
Oh yeah.
That's solid because it was built really well. But finding a COBOL developer or someone to go in and like make adjustments there, that's going to cost you $300-$400 an hour.
Yeah, especially when you figure that a lot of them don't really know how to make the code performant in that environment because there's a lot of low-level stuff that they wouldn't have gotten unless they were there. Now, another thing that will hit you is that there are no more forums for the tech that are active. So, people get online, they ask questions, they get answers. 10 to 20 years out, that's not a thing. Those forums are dead.
20 years ago, we're talking the 90? No, we're talking the early 2000s at this point almost. 99.
Right. So the Visual Basic 6 code that I was writing and getting paid for back then, if you go to the VB6 forums, there's not a lot of activity.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so you need help on something, you're going to have a hard time getting it. And by the way, VB was widely adopted and was the cool thing back then. And there's a ton of people with that experience compared to some other technology that's older.
Well, this also means that job boards for that technology aren't going to be around. It's going to be harder to hire people and find people that know it.
Which means going through a recruiter and getting hit again on that bill because the recruiter takes their cut on top of the exorbitant price.
Next, it's harder to get data out of databases with the newer tools.
Yeah, so your database technology ages, and people don't really think about this very much because it's a really long cycle, but it does happen. You may have a really interesting time getting drivers for some of the older systems. For instance, if you're doing Fox Pro stuff and you need to get data out of there, or like the Advantage database, some of those. I've actually worked with that one. A lot of times the drivers are hard to get. The newer developers don't understand how that system worked. Because it's not necessarily, not all the databases are necessarily relational. I can see 20 years down the road, people are going to say, what is a relational database? Because they're going to be used to document databases or graph databases or something else that we haven't thought of yet.
No, I totally get this because a lot of the stuff that I deal with when I'm on maintenance or that I'm working to replace is 10 to 15 years old. And so I'm seeing a lot of this. That makes sense. Next, you will see a lot of unaddressed 0-day vulnerabilities. I mean, at this point, if a vulnerability is found, it's going to be in the wild before you find out about it.
Yeah, maybe for years, potentially.
It may not even be patched.
Yeah, like if you're using PathWorks, the old Digital Electronics Corporation stuff, the DEC computers, and there's a vulnerability in that, you're probably out of luck because they aren't here anymore. Now, the other thing is that system's hopefully protected from the open internet, but even so.
Also, you have to think that a lot of developers that were on mailing lists back then are gone now.
Yeah. So back then, the mailing lists were the U.S. mail, not email lists in many cases.
And your organization may not be at the same address either. So you may not be getting them at all. Next, you'll see surprise major security changes around operating system level APIs.
Right. So you may be depending on OS APIs for various reasons, usually for performance or for security critical code, those kind of things. And those are likely to change a lot over a 10 to 20 year time frame. Like if you think 20 years ago where Windows was, we were just about to get Windows 98 second edition. And so you had all the ActiveX stuff going on. You had a lot of buffer overflow stuff going on. And so people were calling APIs that didn't enforce, string length, didn't do checks. Those days are long gone. But at some point, if your app is doing that, it's going to get cut off by the operating system, or you're going to have to do config changes, or some, stuff is going to come up related to this.
Finally, at this level, you will have reverse engineering rot. At this point in the game, your engineers are almost certainly not the original people and probably don't have similar experiences. Like I was saying, we've got one person, and there's been a few times where I've asked her about things. She's like, oh, well, so-and-so wrote that. Thankfully, most of the time when she says so-and-so wrote that, they still work around here. So I'm able to like get in touch with them. Like, hey, man, let's grab lunch.
Yeah.
There've been a few times I've done that.
Yeah. And, I've seen it where, like not only is the original crew gone, but everybody that remembers anybody that remembers them is gone.
Right. Yeah.
Like you'll see a name and that's literally all you have, and you can't even find a personnel record. And it's like their acronym for their name. It's not the full name, and you're just out of luck.
So when we were talking earlier about remembering code that we wrote 6 months ago being challenging, and we have to go look at it and work through it. Imagine coming in and the code was written 15, 20 years ago in a language that you don't know, that you've never used. And the thought processes, the way they thought about code is so different that you just, like, I have trouble with this. Like, I mean, I have to literally go back and listen to music that I listened to in high school. And sometimes I even like burn incense that I burned in high school to get in the mindset when I have to look at those things, because that was the same kind of mindset I had when I was writing code in high school.
Yeah. So it's like Champa and Ace of Base, and you're going to go and deal with some global variables.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And people that don't code don't get that. But yeah, you don't remember what it was like to think a different way. Yeah. And you can't get a hold of the people that still think that way.
Well, the thing is, people that don't code don't have to go back and address why they thought a certain way. And it may be why some of us get, like, programming attracts a certain type of person. And I was having a conversation with one of my family members, I don't know if it was my sister or my mom, the other day, about just like all the different, they call them phases. I'm like, it's not a phase, it's not that I no longer like the things that I used to like then. It's that I like new things now. I can still, in my mind, go back to the way I thought when, I dressed a certain way and I listened to a certain kind of music and stuff like that. I could totally go back to the way I thought then, and not in a, oh my goodness, I can't believe what I used to do, in a, oh yeah, that's, that
was fun.
That was fun. That is still a part of me. And that's the way developers think. They, I might not be able to immediately recall it, but with a little bit of effort, I can go back and think that way.
Yeah. So, if you ever did.
Yeah.
Which is the problem here, is you didn't.
Yeah. Speaking of that, the final one we're going to talk about is your 20 plus years. All competent developers are either dead, retired, moved so far up that they don't even, touch a computer anymore.
And you can't go talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And the new ones that know it are extremely expensive. After the 20-year mark, it's going to be really, really hard to find developers to replace any that you lose. I mean, I just looking where I work with the state government, we've got people that have been around almost 20 years. Some of them have been around a little bit longer, like right around that range, but that's when they start to retire. On that note, you will be losing people as they retire, and those replacements are really expensive.
If you can replace them at all, which is the other thing, because, they may also be in a weird business sector and old tech. So you're just out of luck there. Another thing that is a problem is you start having a really, really hard time getting data in and out because of hardware changes. By this point, it's really difficult to replace any hardware that breaks. Like if you're trying to run on the original hardware and you haven't ported for some unbelievable reason, like it was a really expensive computer system. So stuff like connecting to a network or hooking up an external drive either becomes more difficult or just flat out impossible.
Yeah, and on top of that, mistakes are so much easier to make, especially since people aren't used to that older technology.
Well, and it was more unforgiving. Like I've seen a PhD of computer science fry 2 motherboards in one day by plugging in a mouse.
Wow.
Back in the day.
Yeah, I can believe it.
Yeah.
Next, you have data corruption and very likely data loss. Yeah, at some point, some part of the system's going to fail. depending on how short-staffed you are, you may not notice it in time, and you're going to have some data loss or corruption.
Yeah, because people don't watch old systems. If they're stable, they're out of mind.
Data restoration may be interesting for basically the same reasons. It's really, really difficult to get the data out of these systems.
And the other thing that happens is you might have hardware vulnerabilities starting to come into play where they were infeasible before. Like the hardware you're using might have security issues like timing attacks that were difficult to make happen back in the day. But hey, Moore's Law has kicked in for 20 years, and guess what? Now we can do it.
If no one's paying attention to your hardware vulnerabilities, you might have a breach for a long time before it's ever noticed.
Yeah, because people don't even know the traffic patterns that indicate data being exfiltrated off of old systems because it's probably slow and it's in the background and all that. So it doesn't get noticed.
Next, you've got cultural changes that lead to verbiage and image meaning something completely different. I mean, just in this podcast, we talked about a word that Will used that I read as something completely different.
Oh, yeah.
Now, over a 20-year period, the meaning of words may be taken in an entirely different way.
Yeah, or images. And just a really good example of this is the floppy disk icon that you see when you're saving a document in lots of different editors. It's a old school 3.5-inch floppy disk icon. Right? When was the last time you saw somebody with a floppy disk?
Oh, I saw one Saturday, but I was cleaning up my garage.
Yeah, it's just not a thing, but it's still the icon. And so somebody coming into this new, there's a barrier there.
Well, I love the meme of the kid going, seeing a floppy disk and going, "Oh, you 3D printed the save icon."
Yeah, for real.
Because that's reality for him.
Yeah, and speaking of printed 3D save icons, another thing that happens is you lose cultural expertise. There's cultural expertise rot.
In addition to all the knowledge rot that happens over time, at longer intervals, you'll see basic understanding evaporate. For example, one of the things that I built early on in my career was a conversion system for this archaic coordinate system that was used during the Western expansion to dole out land from the government. So it broke it down into plots of land, and it was just square by it broke it down into squares, and then you had tinier squares inside of that, and then you had feet from the southern line and from the eastern line to show you where you were.
Yeah.
Just this archaic system. But you know what? It's still being used because it's in the legislature to use it. And you got people that have been doing this for 30, 40, even 50 years in the industry, not in programming, but in the industry, that's all they know. You give them a GPS coordinate, they're lost. Y'all, all things die. This includes the system you're working on right now and any systems you build in the future. When building an application that is intended to be in production for a long period of time with minimal maintenance, there are things that will probably occur that can create maintenance work. If you're aware of these from the start, you can a lot of times design your applications to make it easier to handle when they come up. That pretty much wraps us up. Before we close everything out, Will, what do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
Well, they always say to begin with the end in mind. But, one thing that we kind of covered in this episode was don't just think about the end, but think about the stages leading up to the end. And if you plan for those, everything gets easier. And it doesn't really matter if it's a software application or it's a business contract. If you think about how this thing is going to fall apart when it finally goes, you can make better decisions on the front end that make it less painful. That's all I got.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment, please email us at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed through Creative Commons.
The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up for weekly emails with extra tips and insights, be sure to check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with news about the show. Catch us each week as we broadcast live, talking about what's going on in the tech world and answering listener questions.
Learn more about all of our shows and groups by going to CompleteDeveloperNetwork.com, where you'll find links to Junior Developer Toolbox, Developer Launchpad, and our other communities. Thanks for listening. See you next time.